I'm Mara Dolan, and I am running for governor's counselor. If you care who our judges are, you need to care who your governor's counselor is. The governor's council confirms judges, parole board members, and commutations and pardons. I'm a public defender. We've never had a public defender in the governor's council, and I think that's a perspective that we badly need. But also, Mira, I just want to thank you so much for having me on the show. And I know we had been in touch and set this up. I didn't get a chance to meet you until Acton's India Day celebration, which was just wonderful. And it was great to
Mhm.
meet you there.
Yeah, you too. I love seeing you there. And definitely running for governor's council is a really cool thing. I've never really experienced talking to someone who's done that. And also, I've never really talked to a public defender, so this is a really cool point of view. Um,
Good.
could you like explain exactly what a public defender does in your own words?
Yes. Public defender represents people who cannot afford to hire their own attorney. The Supreme Court established the right to counsel for people who can't afford to hire an attorney in 1963.
So, what initially drew you to becoming a public defender?
I love advocacy. I love thinking on my feet and speaking on my feet. I was a debater in college and I absolutely loved it. And I really wanted to be able to continue to do those things. And I knew that in other areas of the law, for example, if you go into civil litigation, it's a lot of depositions. There isn't a whole lot of time in court. If you're doing criminal defense work, you're going to spend a lot of time in court. And I love being in court. I love court. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Were you always like set on being a lawyer growing up?
I remember being a kid and having people say to me, "Oh, you sound like a lawyer." And I didn't know what that was. And this was like a recurring theme that people would tell
Hmm.
me I sounded like a lawyer. Um, and then when I was debating in college, a lot of the other debaters wanted to become attorneys. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was the right thing for me.
Yeah. I know you mentioned like wanting to be in court. Was there
Mhm.
ever a point in time where you were interested in like a different type of law?
Yes, I thought about environmental law, but
Hmm.
then I realized because I care tremendously about the environment.
Yeah.
And I thought about civil litigation because it can be very rewarding work as well. But also, when I graduated from law school, I had my daughter was 12, and I wanted to be home with her as much as possible. And doing what I do gave me a flexible schedule and it made it possible for me to be home when I wasn't in court or meeting with a
Yeah.
client. So that was another reason to do it. But I love it. It's
Yeah, for
very
sure.
rewarding. Yeah.
Hmm. And speaking of being rewarding, what are some of the most like challenging and rewarding parts of being a public defender?
The most rewarding parts are really knowing that you've helped your client get to a better place.
Hmm.
Or if your client has been wrongfully accused, then having them acquitted is very rewarding.
Yeah.
The challenging parts, and this doesn't well, one of the challenging parts is one of the reasons I'm running for governor's council. I mean, we do have judges who don't understand things that I think we need judges to understand. For example, 15% of our population has a disability, but in our prisons, it's 40%. So there's clearly a disconnect between what judges understand about disabilities and and I think the way that they should be adjudicating cases. And one of the issues I've talked a lot about is substance use disorder, which is a disability, and how judges put people in jail for relapse all the time,
Hmm.
which science is very clear is the most harmful thing that we can do. So that's one of the frustrations of being a public defender is when you're up against a judge who doesn't understand things that really they should understand.
Yeah, for sure. And you spoke about like disabilities, relapsing. Are there any other systemic issues that you've seen in the justice system, and how have you like addressed them in your work?
Absolutely. One of the biggest issues that I see is racial imbalances, racial disparities in our courts. It shocks people to learn that Massachusetts is actually worse than the national average on racial disparities.
Yeah.
And that's because of the decisions that are made by people in power. We're not treating people equally under the law, as our Constitution requires.
Hmm.
So, as governor's counselor, I'll make sure that nominees understand and are ready, willing, and able to tackle racial disparities so that we can put an end to it.
Yeah, definitely. And have there been any recent legal changes or reform that have impacted your work?
Well, one of the biggest decisions to come out of the Supreme Judicial Court in the last year or so was Commonwealth versus Mattis, in which the Supreme Judicial Court made Massachusetts the first state in the country to hold that a sentence of life without the possibility of parole is unconstitutional for someone under the age of 18.
Oh, wow.
And I'm very, very proud of that. And the
Mhm.
Supreme Judicial Court cited the science of brain development, and they cited a number of factors. Children and emerging adults simply don't have the same ability to assess risk. They're much more susceptible to peer influence, and they have a much greater capacity for change than fully developed adults. So I was very proud of that decision, very pleased to see that handed down. And I want that to come into play with all cases involving children. I've represented
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of children in our juvenile courts, and it's really important for our juvenile courts to understand that the people who appear before them are not fully developed adults and cannot be held to the same standard. And I do
Yeah.
support raising the age of juvenile court jurisdiction.
Hmm. And so you've worked with a lot of kids in like the juvenile courts. You've also
Mhm.
worked with the district and superior courts as well, right?
Yes.
How has it been to work with all three of those?
Well, um, they're all different. I mean, certainly when you're working with children, that's very different because in addition to working with the child, you're also having a fair amount of contact with their parents if their parents are around and involved. Children have the same right to confidentiality within the attorney-client relationship that adults do, but because parents are their caregivers, they live with the parents are much more involved in cases than what you see with representing adults in our district and superior courts.
Hmm.
So district courts are much higher volume. They're just more cases. They're lower level offenses. People who are convicted in district court don't go to state prison. People who are convicted in superior court go to state prison. So that's very different as well.
Hmm. And how do you change like the strategies that you use to defend people depending on which court they're in?
The strategies are always the same. The issue in a case is always about the admissible evidence. Because if evidence is seized in violation of someone's constitutional rights, that cannot be admitted. Okay. This wasn't always the case, but the Supreme Court made sure that it is.
Hmm.
And so the issue is always what's the admissible evidence? Was someone, for example, was there evidence seized on someone's person in violation of their rights? Did they make a statement when they weren't advised of their right to remain silent? Things like that. So
Hmm.
it's always about the admissible evidence because you're innocent until proven guilty. The government has to prove their case. So the issue is always whether the government has proven their case.
Okay, got it. So speaking of that, like, can you share like a case or situation that you've seen that has like particularly influenced your view on like the justice system or even impacted your running for governor's counselor?
I don't really like to talk about
Mhm.
specific cases, but I will say that in my time visiting clients in prison, some of our prisons are well run, some of our prisons are not.
Mhm.
I'm really concerned with how we treat incarcerated people in Massachusetts. And the law allows governor's counselors to go into prisons without the consent of the superintendent. So one of the things that I'll do as your governor's counselor is make sure that I'm in those prisons and making sure that they're doing things the way they need to do so that prisoners' rights are defended and
Yeah,
protected.
yeah, of course. And speaking of your role as governor's counsel, can you explain like what that is in a nutshell?
Sure. The governor's council is, well, this is more than a nutshell, but it's so fascinating. I do want to
Mhm.
share
Of
it with you. The
course.
Governor's Council is the oldest deliberative body in the world. It's 395 years old. It's a unique system. There's only one other state that does it this way. And it is basically the gateway to an entire branch of government. We have an executive branch, a legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And you don't get into the judicial branch without going through the Governor's Council. So it's
Mhm.
an incredibly important position. So judges, clerk magistrates, clerks, parole board members, and recommendations for commutations and pardons have final approval by the governor's council. The governor nominates people, but it's the governor's council that decides whether or not they'll serve.
Wow. Yeah. So it's such an important role. Is there any like particular moment or something that prompted you to run for it? Or has that always like been in your head as what you wanted to do?
I've thought about it for a long time, and I have significant concerns about the incumbent. She's been in for 25 years. She's taken some votes that I think were terrible. She voted to confirm an anti-choice judge just weeks after Roe versus Wade was overturned. She recently called the science of brain development just pages in a book. There are other reasons, terrible commutation pardons that really, very good recommendations for commutations and pardons that she voted against. She doesn't have any legal experience, doesn't have a legal background, does not have the day-to-day contact with our courts that I do, which I think is essential in being a good governor's counselor. So I felt there really was a very strong need for change. And a lot of people agree with me. And I'm the most endorsed Democratic primary challenger in any race in Massachusetts in living memory because the choice is so clear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you spoke about how you have like the contact with the courts that make it easier to be like the governor's counselor. So, do you think there's any other aspects of being a public defender that has like shaped your interest and your skills as a governor's counselor?
Absolutely, because as a public defender, my clients are among the most vulnerable in the
Mhm.
Commonwealth and therefore the most impacted by the decisions of the Governor's Council.
Yeah.
So, in many ways, my running for Governor's Council is a continuation of my work as a public defender because I want to make sure that my clients and all defendants have the best possible judge that they can have.
Yeah, definitely. And like looking back on your career, were there any particular like steps you took in high school, in college, in law school to being where you are now?
Oh my goodness, I had a long jagged journey.
Hmm.
Um, I, when I was in high school, I had a terrible time. I was very badly bullied, and things were different then. And I didn't get the support that I needed. So I left. I dropped out. And I got a GED and I had to support myself from the time I was 18. So I had secretarial skills, so I was able to support myself, thankfully. And I got a GED and then I went to college and I was a debater, which was really great. And I had my daughter along the way, got married, had my daughter, got divorced. So I was a single mother getting through college, getting through law school, starting a law practice. And I was always interested in getting involved and being politically active, but I wanted to wait until my daughter was grown. So when she was a senior in high school, I was elected to the Massachusetts Democratic State Committee, and I'm the state committee woman for the 3rd Middlesex District, and which is represented by State Senator Mike Barrett. And just the more I looked at as a public defender, the more I looked at our courts and realizing the improvements that needed to be made, but also as a very active Democrat and a state committee woman, looking at elections and who was serving. And I also, in addition to being a public defender, I'm also a communications professional. I was the Senate President's communications director. I was the Secretary of State's campaign press secretary. So I have a lot of understanding as to how campaigns work, how communications work, how all the pieces fit together. And this is clearly a seat, governor's counselor, that is incredibly important and that people really are paying attention to, which is great to see. I was told when I first, because this is the second time I run. I ran 2 years ago and I came this close, one Acton, and flipped 14 towns, but came just a little bit short. But it's really been remarkable to see how interested people are in the governor's council. All I have to say to someone is if you care who our judges are, you need to care who your governor's counselor is. And that's it. They're all in. They're all in. So we
Yeah.
haven't had a governor's counselor who's been proactive in that way, who's been communicating across multiple platforms the way that I do. And it's been wonderful to see how much people care and how engaged people are.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because it is such an important role. And also your role as a public defender. I'm curious about what that looks like on the daily basis, how much work that is, because I know it must be a ton.
Well, it depends. So I'm a public defender. I work through the Committee for Public Counsel Services, which oversees all the public defenders in Massachusetts. And there are two types. One is a staff person, and then the other is what's called a bar advocate, and that's me. So I'll have something called a duty day where I'm assigned to a particular court. I go to that court on my duty day. And when someone needs court-appointed counsel, I'm appointed to represent them. In larger courts, they'll have multiple duty attorneys on a day, but I'm in smaller courts most of the time. And so I'm the only one on duty. So that's what happens. And you do have a certain amount of control over the work that you do, which has been really important in terms of this campaign, because I'm working very hard in this campaign. So I've
Yeah.
cut back on the cases I've taken.
Yeah. So I'm really impressed how you're like balancing both of that because,
Not.
well, I'm sure you are because campaigning for something this important while having such an important job as public defender, like,
I
yeah.
do the best I can every day, and I'm not perfect. That's it.
Mm,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of that, like, do you have any lessons you've learned like over, I'm sure you've encountered many challenges throughout your career. Any lessons you have from that that you think are important for any like aspiring lawyers, public defenders, anyone to know?
I will quote Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm from Concord, like Ralph Waldo
Mhm.
Emerson. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string." There's always been something inside me that knew I had a path and knew where to go on the path. So you have that too. So you just follow that. And it's
Mhm.
your own path. And you can't tell in advance what the path is going to be. You just decide at every step which way you're going to go. And if you trust yourself, then you will be on the right path and you will stay on the right path and it will take you to places that are beyond what you can dream now. That is the truth.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, and even to that extent, like I know you spoke about the communication skills you have and things like that. Do you have any other skills in mind that you think are essential that public defenders have, or that any like lawyers have? And how do you think you develop those, or how do you think other people can develop those?
I think that attorneys are at their best when they are following the courage of their convictions, when it's something you really believe in.
Mm,
So that's one of the reasons I love being a public defender, because I deeply believe in what I'm doing.
yeah.
So if you're interested in any area of the law, you need to find an area that you feel passionate about. And I also remember one of my law professors saying, a lot of lawyers go out and they find an area of the law and they love it and it's fabulous for 10 years and then they go, why am I doing this? And then
Mm-hmm.
they either do something else, or and that's kind of what happened to me. I mean, I was a public defender for I'm not sure how many years, and then I started doing political communications work because I actually had a local cable show like yours, and in Concord, which was then it was called Concord Carlisle Community Television. Now it's the Minuteman Media Network. But
Oh,
I had
wow.
all, as you found, when you invite people to come on your show, they tend to want to come on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was amazed that the people came on, elected officials, candidates, policy experts. It was wonderful. And then at some point I got noticed by NECN and I started doing political commentary. And I was on NECN and GBH and Channel 5 and all over the place, which was great. And then I got noticed by the Senate president who hired me to do it full time. So I didn't practice law for about 4 or 5 years, but I did miss it. I
Uh,
did miss it. And
yeah.
so I was really happy to go back to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, do you have any final like advice that you would give to someone considering a role in law? Like I know I am for sure. I know a lot of the people watching the show probably are too. So, yeah.
I think that there are people who are just born lawyers. There's
Hmm.
something in them that just clicks with the law. And if that's you, then do it. Absolutely do it. If you're looking at law school because you don't know what else to do and it might be interesting, it may turn out to be the right thing for you, but it may not. But given your already demonstrated level of commitment and interest in the law, I'm guessing you're a born lawyer and this is exactly what you should be doing.
Hmm. And I think your story, your advice, everything was like so meaningful. Your story is so impressive to me. I really loved hearing about it. So yeah, thank you so much for everything you've said.
It's really been wonderful to be on with you, and I want to follow your journey. So please keep in touch and let me know how you are. And if I can be of assistance at any point, please let me know. And for folks watching, the Democratic primary is on September 3rd. There is no Republican running for the seat. I'm running against a long-term incumbent. She's been in for 25 years and it's time for change. Please make sure you get to the polls and vote in the Democratic primary by September 3rd for Mara Dolan for governor's counselor. Thank you so much, Mira.
Thank you so much.